Fishing is a way of life in Alaska. In coastal communities, fish are not only an important source of food, but have great cultural significance. Fishing brings families and communities together. It connects generations as knowledge is passed down.
Fishing has always been a means of sharing the outdoors with our guests. I grew up in the Hawaiian Islands and I love to fish, but I never thought that I would be a lodge owner 30 or 40 years later. But I do like to teach people new skills. I enjoy being outdoors, and I actually enjoy people catching fish more than myself. Halibut is a prize fish. You may catch a 200-pound halibut and be lucky. There's always an opportunity. People like to target certain species of rockfish. They like to cook in Asian style, steamed rockfish, eating the head and everything. People even take home the bull kelp and make soup out of it. And so the quantity of food isn't as important as the variety for our guests.
Man. Everything from mushrooms and berries, lots of berries this year, oh my gosh. And fish and deer. I like fishing, but more important to me is just eating the fish. We eat a lot of fish, and we can the salmon, and we freeze the halibut, and dry a little bit of halibut. But we eat fish probably 4 or 5 times a week at least. Clams is not so important here. We don't have really handy-dandy clam beds, but when I lived in Juneau with my little kids, we ate a lot of clams. That was our main protein food. And most of the Tlingit and other native villages that you see on the northwest coast, Pacific Northwest coast, I think are near some kind of a clam bed, and that was winter food if you didn't have a lot of dried fish in the old days and deer. You know, it's so important to me, so important. It's just, one time somebody who came to visit from down south said, "Do you guys realize how much you talk about your food?" I was right, because everything seemed to have a story to go with it, maybe.
Being able to go out and get my own subsistence is very valuable to me, especially as a single parent. You learn how to provide for yourself. You learn how to discipline yourself in certain ways. You get to bond with friends and family in a healthy environment.
I had recently during herring egg time, an elderly lady that brought eggs to, which I have for years and years and years. Each year when she gets a bunch of herring eggs for her freezer, it's like the one time a year that she doesn't worry that she doesn't have any money. And so I think for people like that, there's it's more than just having food. And so it's very, very deep way of life.
It's my livelihood. I grew up with my dad putting worms on a hook, and it's my life. For Alaska, it's a lot of our livelihoods. We live it, we breathe it, and that's what we do.
Maintaining healthy fish populations and fishing opportunities for coastal communities are important goals of fisheries management. Understanding how many fish are in the ocean, their sizes, and where they live is crucial for determining how many fish can be sustainably caught by fishermen. Alaska has a longer coastline than all of the other states combined. This poses enormous logistical and financial challenges to scientific monitoring. As a result, the biological information needed by managers is lacking for many nearshore species and habitats. But fishermen who have spent a lifetime on the water have in-depth knowledge about fish and their environment.
We've seen species change in size, locations, seeing how the environment has changed the species over a long historical period of time. I think we have that knowledge on the water.
Researchers at the University of Alaska Fairbanks are documenting local knowledge of recreational and subsistence fishermen in communities along the Gulf of Alaska. Their goal is to reconstruct historical trends in abundance and body size of halibut, rockfish, salmon, and other species from fishermen's local knowledge.
We've interviewed about 100 fishermen, and we want to understand their observations of long-term changes in the environment. And we ask fishermen to basically score the abundance level for a particular species for every decade that they had experience.
Where would you put halibut abundance at in the 90s?
I would say medium high. I feel like most of the spots that we fished around, we could get them pretty consistently.
And then once we have abundance trends for each person that we interview, we can combine those across all of the interview respondents to get kind of an average trend over time and to see how much agreement there was among individuals.
Science is one thing, and part of that science is interviewing people that participate in the fisheries and people that have had decades of experience, just to get their feedback and see what's actually happening on the fishing grounds. Because some people say that's anecdotal information, but it's based on people's experience that actually do it for a living and they see the changes occurring.
Fishermen have ecological knowledge about where fish live, their movement patterns, migration patterns, their habitats, what they eat, and how they interact. And all of that information is really valuable to scientists as well.
Well, I know in the beginning when we started the lodge, we never encountered arrowtooth flounder, and now it's become almost an invasive species in our area. So the arrowtooth populate the same areas that the halibut coexist in. I think ridges that have large halibut tend to have less arrowtooth, but as we fish out the resident populations of large halibut and only small halibuts around to fend themselves off, the arrowtooth kind of move in and take over the ridges.
When I first came to Homer, it was not real common to go out and catch limits of halibut and throw lots and lots of them back. It seems like now there's a lot more fish around, but they're a lot smaller on average. And that's the big change I've seen. There's some days you go out there in the inlet and you'll be fishing and literally you'll get a surface bite going on. You can look down. I have video footage of it where I have hundreds of halibut under my boat. And I know most of them are fairly small. But I guess the little analogy I like to use is there's lots and lots of seeds in the ground. They're just not growing very fast.
I haven't seen dramatic changes in the kings, not like the halibut, because most of the kings that we've normally caught out here are between 10, 15, 20 pounds.
Well, we call them feeder kings because they're actually not going back to the local rivers to spawn. They're cruising around the North Pacific feeding, and that's kind of why we get their nickname feeder kings. And when I say they're feeding, a lot of times you cut them open and their stomachs will be just completely full of bait fish. I had one a couple weeks ago that had 14 hooligan in it. I mean, the stomach was so stretched out that you could actually see through the stomach and see the bait fish in them. And he had them all, like he had some going this way and some going this way. I mean, it's like he knew, okay, I gotta eat this one going this way in order to get it. And then he ate a metal spoon, which is kind of bizarre to me, but but it's pretty amazing what you see in them.
I was up in the north arm of Dundas this year at low tide, and otters probably were just moving up there. You see a lot of clamshells and then pits at low tide. Just all these pits from the otters getting clams. When I moved here in 1988, for instance, there were lots of Dungeness crab and clams. And probably by, I'm guessing, around the year 2000, they became scarce. Some of the people that we most respect for their knowledge of the natural situation are commercial fishermen who've been doing it a long time and really have to watch what's going on in a very actively changing world. Certainly actively changing now with climate change, but it's always changing rapidly too. So they really watch it.
One thing that fishermen's knowledge gives us that science often doesn't is a much longer term perspective on change in the environment. Many fishermen have been fishing for decades and their families have been fishing and generations of knowledge are passed down.
Talking to some of the elders in town, they say it's a cycle that comes through, but they can't pinpoint the years. But they say it's a certain cycle that happens and it's going to be bad for up to 3 to 4 years. And then when it comes back, it's going to rebound big time. And I'd rather trust my elders when they say something like that because they've been through it quite a few times.
Fishermen have a deep connection to the environment. Their knowledge, combined with scientific understanding, can provide the information needed to manage nearshore fisheries.
One thing we're trying to do with this project is really showcase how fishermen's knowledge and scientific knowledge can be used together in a common framework. And we are hoping that by showing an example of this, that it inspires agency scientists and managers to better incorporate fishermen's knowledge into science and decision making.
The National Marine Fisheries Service is divided into 5 regions in the United States, and with Alaska being one large region. And we have 2 recreational fishing coordinators, one on the science side and one on the regulatory side, and I'm on the regulatory side. And so I am the person that anyone in the public or fishermen call if they have questions about the recreational fishery. Everyone has ideas about how the fishery should be managed, so we get lots of ideas about what should be done differently. We do get positive feedback too about things that are working well. We do hear about how certain areas have been fished out, or where the fishing used to be better, or the fish used to be bigger or smaller, and how there's a lot more pressure in certain areas because of, well, different factors, but growth of certain industries. The fishermen really know what works best for their businesses, what works best for the areas that they're fishing in. And it's worked out that it's maintained catch at closer to the levels that we need them at too.
I think as we work on policies, we need to work really hard to make sure the voices that aren't necessarily included are somehow included in the process, and just remind people that there's lots of views. I hope that we can kind of keep status quo and still be doing the same thing 10 years from now, still getting herring eggs in the springtime and get the halibut and the seaweed after that, and then work through the salmons and still have clams to dig. People obviously had to adapt before, and things change, and so your focus changes, I guess, as things are available. And I think as long as people are adaptable as it relates to climate, that will probably end up all right.
Fostering communication between fishermen and scientists enriches our collective knowledge of the natural world. Understanding how our environment has changed will help coastal communities adapt to future change and preserve a fishing way of life.
I'm just trying to help maintain it. I don't want any more or any less. I just help maintain what we have, because I grew up in areas like in Washington where I watched it go by the wayside, and their seasons and bag limits got so reduced to where it's just a week or 10 days out of the whole entire year, you know, and it's pretty tight limits. And I think we have a fantastic fishery here, and I think we can hang on to it. Fishing is one of those things where it always has amazed me that you can put a hook and a line in the water, and you look at all these millions and millions of gallons of water out there, however you want to put it, and to get a fish to bite, it's just amazing to me. But it's I think a lot of people use it for, well, of course they use it to harvest food, but also just the peaceful tranquility of being out there and just kind of focusing with you and the fish. And I'm not a religious person, but I always look at the bay and all this area as my chapel. So I feel like I go to church every day. I feel pretty lucky. I'm always looking and seeing what they're eating. I find some pretty interesting stuff sometimes.
What's the craziest thing you've found?
Well, one time we were fishing down by Point Adams, which is about 30 miles from here. It was right around this time of year. And we had a pretty good day, and we had one big old halibut that was probably around 100 pounds or so. And I brought him back to the dock and everything. I'm filleting him out just like I was doing earlier, and I noticed this big lump in the stomach, and so I cut it open, and boom, out pops his foot. And I was like, whoa. And the guy that caught it goes, man, do you think we ought to call somebody? You know? And it's like, oh, so we started looking at it a little closer, and ended up being, he was a veterinarian. And right where the toenails should have been, it was a knuckle. And I was like, wait a minute, that's a barefoot. So that's by far the craziest thing I've ever found in a halibut is a barefoot. I found a sweet potato one time. A friend of mine found a puffin in one time. It was like a Cheeto bag, you know, small, like you find in your lunch. It was all balled up, and it was in the mouth of a yellow eye rockfish, which is pretty incredible if you think about it, because that Cheeto bag had to get all the way down to the bottom. Yellow eye rockfish live, they don't come up above 100 feet. You know, they're always 100 feet or deeper. And so that Cheeto bag had to get all the way on the bottom, but that makes sense why they're orange. You know, they're eating Cheetos, you know, so.